Check this out. Today, we are customizing a Harley Davidson Sportster. Our customer is roughly about 5 foot, and it's so important when you have a motorcycle to sit flat-footed on it, or stand flat-footed on it, or sit flat-footed. Either way, you really want to be flat-footed. She is not flat-footed on this bike. She already lowered the bike 1 inch in the front, 1 inch in the rear. Making a custom seat pan alone isn't gonna do it. We tried to have her sit on it with no seat, and still she's on the tippy toes, just barely on the ground, barely on the ground. So what we have to do is modify this bike. We got to cut the frame. We have to make a seat pan. We have to get it really low and see what happens. Let's get started. Now that the metal's fabricated for the Sportster frame, I'm gonna weld it on, and then we are gonna get it in primer, bring it over to the other shop, and make a fiberglass seat pan for it, and then hopefully get them down to test fit it for the final time this week, so we get to just upholster it and get her on her bike, make her happy. That'd be kind of nice. I'm sure she's dying to ride the bike before the end of the season. We weld that up, and we'll get it in primer. All right, so we threw some primer on there, and we're gonna let that dry, and then sand it down, prime it again, sand it, paint it. We still have to fab up the tank bracket. And then once it's dry, we'll bring it over to the other shop and make a fiberglass pan tomorrow. As you can see, the fiberglass pan is made, well, not made, but it's fiberglass. The bike's all bagged off. We like to really bag them off quite a bit. As you can see, everything gets masked off, gets papered off, back masked, and then put plastic on it. Let's leave that so it could dry. The Sportster seat pan is dry. Just marked a real rough mark of where we're gonna have the initial trim. Now we're gonna pull it off. Just like that. Pan's ready to be trimmed. Sportster pan is trimmed. I gave it a rough foam. We're gonna run over and grab the bike, bring it over here so that we could not final foam it, but get it close so she could test fit it. Okay, so here's the seat foamed out. I kind of been digging this seat. I think it'll work out pretty good for her. Once she sits on it, we can do the final shaping of it and wrap it up. Before we continue, I want to do kind of like a little disclaimer. We didn't show us cutting and welding the frame because we don't want this to do a how-to video, because we don't want somebody who doesn't know what they're doing cutting up their bike. If you own your bike outright and you want to customize it, we get it. But if you don't know what you're doing, you should pay a professional to do it. Also, if you are financing your motorcycle and you start cutting up the frame and doing that, I'm sure it's gonna void a lot of warranties or get you in trouble somehow. We highly do not recommend you lopping off parts of your bike if you don't know what you're doing. And take it from me, we're experiencing this. I'm watching 2 people I know go through it last year. They're cutting their car apart and doing all this fabrication work. Sometimes when people don't know what they're doing and get through it and do it, they don't even see the difference from what they ruined and what they didn't ruin. And we're watching another guy that we know that's cutting up a car right now and has no idea how to put it back together. So you have like 2 opportunities when you don't know what you're doing. One is you ruin it and send it to a professional to repair what you did, which costs a lot of money. And is 2, which we're seeing now with the guy, is you ruin the person's car so bad that most likely it's not going to be repairable, because, well, everything's repairable, but for the value, it would far exceed the value of the car to do these repairs. I know this is a motorcycle, not a car, but we're just watching this happen. It's kind of like, what do you call it? Like when you're like deer in headlights watching this and you just can't stop watching someone destroy a car. But don't do that on your bike. Anyway, we did. And what we ended up doing here is all this work. You know, I think I said earlier, she already lowered the bike 1 inch in the front and 1 inch in the back. Then by doing this seat, what we end up doing is not only just lowering it another couple inch, probably about 1.5 inches to maybe 2 inches like here, we're able to move her way farther forward. So now she's standing in front of the oil pan and the battery box. so that you really get a nice stance in there. You still got to be careful because you got your exhaust and your exhaust gets hot. You don't want to burn yourself. But now when she's standing upright, she can really scoot forward. And if you look here, standing upright, this bike is really low here. Very, very low, and hopefully she loves it. Great news. She came down, sat on the bike, and loved the height of the seat, which means we could finish foaming it, and then we're gonna make a, blah, 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 blah. I can't even talk, I'm so excited. We're gonna finish foaming it, wrap it, and then make a cool cover for it. She wants gray silver stitching on it and a diamond pattern, and that's pretty much it. I tell you, it's so funny to see someone so excited to be able to stand flat-footed on a bike and just walk it forward and backwards. I mean, it's, you tall guys, you don't get it, but for a lot of us shorter riders, when you're actually on a bike, to be able to be stable enough to push it backwards and forward on any ground, any surface, it's a really great feeling, and we did it for this one. Now let's get going and wrap it up. Knowing that she is comfortable at this height, I took a extra, probably about an 1/8 to a 3/16 of an inch off of it, because I'm going to put a firmer foam on here and sand it and sculpt it, and then it'll be good enough for a seat cover. I just went and did a quick pattern on this little seat here. A lot of times I'll do a pattern if we're doing diamond stitch, because if you do diamond stitch on 1/2 inch sew foam, the whole material shrinks as you do it. A bike seat's small, so it doesn't shrink that much. Plus, we're only doing 1/4 inch sew foam on this top surface, so it's gonna shrink a little bit, but not much. But I still wanna make it oversized, then I'll take our pattern afterwards and drop it on here. So I just did a quick tape pattern, and we're gonna cut this out and pattern it out. Okay, so I am putting the diamonds on here now. I know we have templates and stuff like that too. I know a lot of people use templates and it is quicker, but sometimes based on the size of the seat, I like to do different diamonds and shapes so that it's proportioned properly. This one here, I want to do longer diamonds and thinner because it's a smaller seat. So we're going with this pattern here, and I'm just gonna finish doing my lines. And as you see me say before in a lot of videos, when you're doing your artwork or anything, you always use metal straight edges, because these are yardsticks, they're not straight edges. And they don't have a straight edge on them, and they get wanky because of the wood. We want a nice straight line. And then we're going to use 1/4 inch sew foam on this one. Again, I think I mentioned that because I like the look of it better. And we can't use 1/2 inch because a 1/2 inch is going to probably raise her up maybe 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, and we really don't want that. With the 1/4 inch, we'll still get a little bit of a pronunciation from the stitching, but it might lift her up 1/16 of an inch, which we can handle that. So now we can take our template. We have our diamonds all patterned out, and we can just lay it on here. This is why we do it oversized. So I'll show you what we're gonna end up doing. So now, if you imagine that was a template and we sew this together, this whole piece shrinks. So if we cut this out exactly to that size and sewed in all these stitching, now when that shrinks, even if it shrinks 1/8 of an inch, your whole pattern is gonna be off, and we wanna make sure it's exact. So I'm gonna put the 1/4 inch sew foam on here, which we have over here. Okay, so the question is always to glue or not to glue, and the reason I'm gluing these diamonds is I've been trying to not glue a lot. But when you're doing a motorcycle seat and you have a radical transition and you don't glue the material on and you stitch it, sometimes it'll pucker up and it looks like hell. So I'm going to glue this on. I'm going to laminate it pretty well and keep it tight so that when we stitch it, it has a nice transition and doesn't have any puckering in the diamonds, hopefully. Let's glue this up. And then we'll sew it up. I always check my bobbin thread when you're going to do a lot of sewing, and this is like halfway there. So I know that it's going to run out at some point, and then we're going to have to swap it out. So I just want to keep an eye on it to make sure that when we run out at the end. I hate when you run out in the middle, then you got to tie it off in the middle and all that stuff, which is not a big deal. But anywho, let's get sewing. This is the tedious part when doing diamonds, is you want to kind of go slow so you make sure that you're stitching on the line. One hiccup and you're off the line and this whole piece is ruined. So we want to make sure that we take our time and do it right. I'd say there's no real rhyme or reason because of the way you sew these things, but like on larger pieces of material, I'll go around and sew the edges, all the perimeters first, so that it kind of folds in on itself. This being a very small piece of material, we don't really have to do that because we can access all sides of it pretty easily. Okay, so I'm going to sit here for a while and sew, and I'll let you do something other than watch me sew, because I don't think it's really probably that interesting. So what's funny is I started off saying how I check the bobbin thread. I don't want to run out in the middle of a stitch because it's a pet peeve and just, I don't know, it irritates me. And of course, someone comes in, we're talking, and then I forget to pay attention to my bobbin. So here it is. We stopped right in the middle of a stitch here, and it happens to be the stitch that I screwed up the drawing on it, but we're in the right place. So the way you can fix this, there's two ways really. You could go underneath here and you pull your bottom thread out. That pulls your top thread through, and then you could just snake it through. Right, now it's through, it's ended, and we can just tie this in a knot. And we're going to have to start over. You also can use a needle, put the thread on the other side through the needle, and then push it through. If you're in like a very intricate stitch work and you're afraid that when you pull it through, that thread might be one stitch length off or something, then I'll do that. I always do multiple. I usually do 3 ties. I might have just done 4 because I was talking. A little snippety snip. Get rid of this one. So now we're going to come back, put the needle right back in that hole. Okay, and now hold our thread tight and start going. Okay, so now we'll just do the same thing. We're just going to pull the bobbin thread through, pull the top thread through, make sure that it's seamless. There's no missing stitch, which there's not. And bada boom, tie it off. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes I leave the original stitch long, and I'll tie it off to that too. I actually don't think I'll be using this area anyways because our pattern doesn't fall on it, but just in case I sew it anyways. Okay, and just like that, we are done, and we're not missing any stitching. So let's put our pattern on it, move to the next step. I just got to do a video, hold on. Okay, so I transferred our pattern onto our diamonds. And I'm just going to mark, or I just marked 3/8 of an inch out all the way around it. And now one of the biggest problems you have with diamonds is you want to make sure that this side is symmetrical with that side, because when you put it on the seat, if it is symmetrical, you want everything to follow the contours the same, stop at your stitching the same. So you really have to pay attention to this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my mark that I just did and stitch on it with we're going to reduce the size of the stitch per inch, and I'm going to run through and do that. And the reason I do that is so when it crosses over these threads with a smaller stitch, you have a better chance of them not unraveling. So I'll stitch that, and then we're going to come through and transfer it to the other side. So one thing I just did is I showed you how I marked it 3/8 and then I went and stitched it. Technically, you don't have to do that. When you do sticky patterns like this with the tape, you could just run your walking foot right along the edge here, and that actually stitches exactly where you want it to be. And you can see here I went through and did smaller stitching like I had said, so it covers over here, and there's more stitching going over our other stitching. Now we are just going to cut this really close to that edge, but not on that edge. Okay, so now you can take your pattern and flip it over and do the same thing. This is not sticky on this side. I actually, a lot of times I'll rough mark this, where I think it's going to be, and then I'm going to go through. I got my rough marks there. Now you could actually just measure everything. So we're going to start from the center, and all I'll do is I'll pick a point, and we're going to measure out. So from this mark right to that tip, I don't know if you see that. So you got that tip there, and we are at 5 1/16. So we want to go over to this tip and measure 5 1/16, which is right there, falls on that, just past it. Where are we at? Just past it. So you can see, once I pass it, you can see that's actually pretty good. We're there. So now we're going to do the next one. Okay, so all of our marks look pretty good here. Kind of went through side to side to make sure everything checks out. So now we're going to stitch this side and trim it. So now I'm just going to test fit this on here, and sorry I was yelling, the compressor was running. What I want to make sure is that there's no puckers in it. When you get this, you can get a lot of creases and puckers. One way to kind of get them out is instead of pushing this in really tight, you actually pull it in a little bit, and when you go to push the seat in and heat it and glue it in there, you actually could pull it in and it'll stretch it a little bit. We probably don't have to do that in this one because it's has a nice radius to it and it's not puckering up anywhere. So now we just got to come through. We're going to sew this back piece on here. Before we do this, I have to switch threads because I don't like doing my butt seams with colored threads just in case it shows. This way, when we do the, when you pull it, which I'll show you, you won't see it. Here we go. Okay, we just got the butt seam on there. What I like to do is, well, actually, I'll show you. The reason that I don't like to have the contrasting stitch and sew it when you're doing your butt seam, because there's always a possibility that when you go to pull this, you'll be able to see through there and actually see a different color. I don't like how that looks. So now I'm just gonna go through and look and make sure that my V's, like as you're sewing, you make sure you line them up on the backside, but sometimes when you flip them over, they still might not look correct. 1, 2, that's right. I was worried about that one. Nope, pretty good here. These are all lined up well. Okay, so now we can put the top stitch on, so we're gonna change thread again. Back to gray, gray in there. Now because this sew foam is actually glued on here, I don't really want to wrinkle this up much. I'm gonna pull it tight so I get our top stitch on here nice. Okay, let's go try out this. Let's see if it fits. Okay, so I got this pinned off. Now I'm just gonna take the back side here and just go around and mark where we're gonna sew. So I'm just going through and trimming this off here. I don't need to sew this because this is smooth material, but I'm gonna sew here because with all the stitching on it, I don't want that to unravel. So now we'll pop this off, stitch it, and then we are going to trim it. Now we went around and stitched our line. So we stitched right over this line, and everywhere it intersects is covered now. So now I could actually just snip this, including our top stitch, you know, goes right across there. So now we can just snip this all right off. We do go behind these and we super glue a dab at each tip, which you gotta be really careful because super glue can be your worst enemy. If you get it on the outside of a leather or vinyl, that stuff is pretty permanent and tough to get off sometimes. So now a lot of times on the bottom of the motorcycle seats, you'll see me fold the edge over and make a nice stitch edge. I can't do that on this one because I do not want to raise it up at all. We want this as flat in the bottom as possible. So let's stitch it on and see what it looks like. One more test fit. Now the true test. Let's see if this fits and if I can carry the phone, the tripod, and my coffee and the seat downstairs all in one. Seat's all set. Let's test fit to see how it works.